Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, a nostalgic look back at our favorite Rangers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm Tom Browning, along with my co-host Rob Berger. We can be heard on Google Play, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and of course, our website at gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. That's gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. Please check it out. You can capture all of our episodes on our webpage. You can contact us by just clicking on the contact bar. You can leave a message. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about the players that you would like for us to profile. Love to hear about maybe some of the seasons other than the 60s, 70s, and 80s that really made an impact on you as a fan. Again, we will be going off the menu every once in a while. We'll be talking about the current day New York Rangers, the state of the franchise, and again, we love to talk about previous playoff games, impactful trades that took place in New York Rangers history. So wherever you listen to us, please hit subscribe. It's free. So without further ado, here are your hosts, Tom Browning and Rob Berger. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. I'm Tom Browning, along with my great friend and co-host, Rob Berger. Rob, how you doing today, bud?
I'm doing great. We have snow on the ground. Definitely getting to the winter. Full hockey season.
It is hockey season. Yep, we got like you said, the snow's on the ground. We got the nip in the air. We have, we're in December already. Who would have? God, it's so hard to believe, Rob, that we're in December. It just seems like yesterday we were talking about Ranger preview and what we could expect. And now I think we've got a pretty good taste for this club. I think we have a pretty good idea as to what's going to happen with this club going forward, how successful they're going to be, I believe. And we got a pretty good feel for what's going on in the National Hockey League today. It's funny, the last time we had our show, we talked about how some of the better teams were struggling and some of the weaker teams were doing well. And true to form, the Sabres have come back to the pack, and the St. Louis Blues have gotten closer to their Stanley Cup playing ways since we had our last show. The Bruins continue to really steamroll, and the Islanders, boy, they're a club that we didn't, speak very much about the last show, and they had quite a run, setting a team record for consecutive wins. So a lot of things are starting to take shape in the National Hockey League.
Yeah. The Canadians are coming back to normal. The Toronto Maple Leafs have decided to play offense-only hockey under Sheldon Keefe. Don't care about defense. And now, just like that, they're only 2 points out of a playoff spot. What concerns me the most is with the Rangers, though, that they're in a position that they're 3 points out of the second wild card, and here we go again with a team that's going to be confused at the trading deadline, and potentially, hopefully, not try to make a move to make it into the playoffs just to get a home playoff date, because this team is not as good as the other teams in the playoffs right now, and I don't see them making this. Isn't Columbus playing Tampa Bay last year. The Rangers are not that good.
No, I agree. And I think any Ranger fan who really looked at the season as a stepping stone to the playoffs this year was misguided and did not have the appropriate expectations. I totally agree. I mean, this team should not be selling their youngsters or trading their youngsters at the deadline in the hopes of acquiring a few veterans for a playoff push. That would totally go against the program, right? That's not what they should be doing. I think they should continue the organic route and let the kids develop, let the kids play. I think they're playing better. I think they're progressing a little bit more quickly than I thought. But obviously, they're not one of the better teams in the National Hockey League yet. But I think they've shown, I think there are some guys that have really stepped up and have been playing well. And we're going to get into our topic in a moment on the best coaches or our favorite coaches in, not Ranger history, but since the 1960s to present day. But I think Quinn has done a great job shaping this team in the image that he wants to take it. And obviously there's a long way to go. But I think some players are starting to really produce. I think Filipino, I think the time spent in Hartford did wonders for him. Ryan Strome, I've been a fan of Ryan Strome since the Islanders drafted him, 6-7 years ago. I love his feisty, sometimes undisciplined type of play, but I think he brings a lot to the table. And obviously, Capo has done great, and Zibanejad is coming back, and he's made an impact. And I think the Bulgarian Beast has played well in goal, with the exception of a few games where he hung in there, didn't play as great, but he hung in there for the team to come back and win. And so I think the team was on schedule. I don't think anyone should have the idea that they are a playoff contending team. But if they trade people, they should be trading the likes of Chris Kreider at the trade deadline to get more assets, either draft picks or young players that can develop under Quinn and Jeff Gordon. What are your thoughts?
I think you're going to kill me for saying this. I think the guy to trade is Ryan Strome. I think he's playing better hockey than he's the best hockey of his career right now.
Yeah.
And he's an RFA. So now might be the opportunity to move him to a contender and get some assets for him. Obviously, I've said this before. I think Chris Kreider needs to be moved. But yeah, those two guys, and then obviously the people we talk about all the time on defense. We don't need to get into that right now. Again,
right.
We've talked about Stahl and Smith enough.
Right.
Those numbers are too big. They're not going anywhere. But Strome is very movable with only a $3 million contract for the rest of the season and an RFA. So I don't know. I think he might. More people will want Strome than Kreider right now.
That's very true. Strome is a funny player in that he's still a young guy. He's only, 27 years old, I think, right now, maybe going on 28. He brings a lot of leadership. The Rangers don't have many players that play with an edge at forward. They do on defense, like Lindgren plays with an edge. Smith, does play with an edge. But Strome, I think he's a guy that is not only good in the locker room, but he's playing his best hockey, and I think he's come into his own. I think he and Quinn have connected, and I think Quinn has gotten the best out of Strome. And I think Strome can continue to improve. I would be more apt, if you had to trade a youngster, and I like this kid a lot, Brett Howden, I think, could be a guy that the Rangers can move because he's a very disciplined two-way hockey player. And I would rather keep a Ryan Strome, who's kind of plays like Brett Howden, but has got better hands than Howden. He scores more goals. And if you're going to build your team down center, like the Rangers are trying to do with Zibanejad, and then you got Hedl as your second-line center, and right now I guess Strome is going to be playing third-line minutes, and Howden's playing fourth-line minutes. I don't think Strome would be as much of an asset playing fourth-line minutes with the Rangers. And I think he's young enough to where you can still include him in that nucleus. So I would be more apt to trade a Brett Howden, who I think has established himself as a very good hockey player. I'd hate to lose him, but I would rather have him be moved than Strome right now. Elias Anderson, I think right now is a bust. I think it's pretty obvious he's not going to be an impactful player in the league. He's in Hartford right now, and you could move him too, I think, but you're not going to get much for Elias Anderson. So you're probably just better off leaving him in Hartford. Kreider has to go. He's just not a consistent player. I talk about him this way each and every show, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse on that. But other than Kreider, I don't know who else the Rangers are going to move for assets. I think we agree on Kreider, but it should be interesting. I don't know. What other thoughts do you have on the Rangers?
I just think the return on Strome right now, who knows, that could change come February, would be higher than Kreider. I would like to see Strome stay. I just think, in terms of building a nucleus, but if they're going to, I think the return is higher. So that might be the best move for them. Otherwise, I guess I shouldn't, but I keep looking forward and what they're going to do with Georgiev at the end of the year. I wonder if they move him.
I hate to see that.
Or are you going to re-sign him for $3.5 million next year and have $12 million wrapped up in cap space, wrapped up in goaltenders?
Yeah, Shesterkin has come down to earth a little bit in Hartford the last couple of weeks. I think he's going to be a good player. You got to keep him, obviously. They invested an awful lot in him. I think the game has evolved to a two-goalie system right now. I think, it's very cyclical, right? Back when I was a kid, back in the 60s and 70s, you had your Eddie Jockermans and your Glenn Halls and Tony Espositos that played virtually all the time. And then middle to late 70s, it went to a two-goalie system with Bunny LaRocque and Ken Dryden and Villamure and Jockerman and Cheevers and Johnston. And then it went back to the one-goalie, style again with, Mike Richter and, Henrik Lundqvist. And I think it's evolving back to a two-goalie system, and I would like to see Georgiev stay. I think if there's any way of having Lundqvist moved during the offseason, they're not going to move him, obviously, in February or March. So that's not going to happen. I've come to that conclusion. You were right. They're not going to move Lundqvist. And he's actually had a pretty decent – he's been up and down, Lundqvist. The games he has – I think there's 11 of the 16 starts he's had an 880 save percentage, but the other 7 or 8 starts he's had, otherworldly type numbers. So he's been up and down. But I'd like to see Georgiev and Shesterkin form that 1-2 tandem. I think they got to keep Georgiev. That's my feeling, but who knows what Gorton's going to do,
No, especially at 23?
He's 23, yeah.
It's so funny what you say about Lundqvist, because that's so true, and that's what I really forms opinions on him, is he puts together these great starts out of nowhere. Before Thanksgiving, 30 saves and allowing 1 goal against the Capitals, but then comes out in his next start and loses 4 goals to the Senators. Now, in his defense, no pun intended, the Rangers defense is not very good. And if you compare them to the rest of the league, the Rangers allow a ton of shots and a ton of quality scoring chances. And the only thing that's keeping the Rangers in the games this season is the fact that their offense, even though they don't generate a lot of offense, if you look at and I hate using this word, advanced stats or analytics, the shots they do take are high quality shots, and they're finishing them. And they're one of the best teams. Crazy enough, they're one of the best teams in the league. They're in the same ballpark as Washington and Tampa and Edmonton in terms of high quality shots, and they're making those shots. It's the fact though that their possession numbers are terrible, and the other team has the puck a lot, and they allow a lot of shots. Fast games. So you have these guys. Lundqvist that 4 goals 2 nights ago to Vegas. But then before that, he was in net against the Bruins in overtime in Boston.
Right.
And, Eddie beat Carolina, beat a red hot Minnesota team. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, I think if you look back at Lundqvist's career and analyze it like you and I just did, I think you'd see a lot of similarities. I don't know if this is really. He may be a little bit less consistent. I think he's definitely less consistent now, but I don't think he was ever the most consistent goalie, even back in the day when they went to Stanley Cup Finals. If you look at his regular season game-by-game stats, I think you'd see a lot of similarities to the way he's playing now. He's been great at times, and he's been very average at times. And unfortunately, in the playoffs, I think he's had more average than great. But, to speak to what you're saying about possession, I think a lot of that has to do with the way that Quinn is trying to generate a team that plays very similar to the way the Boston Bruins play, the Washington Capitals play, very LA Kings played a few years ago. Very aggressive, in-your-face, hard-nosed, not dirty hockey, not with a lot of goon play. But when you are a physical hockey team, your possession numbers are very, very good. And I think that's what he's trying to establish. And that's why I think he likes a guy like Ryan Strome, who, plays with an edge. And I think he's looking for more guys like that. And on defense, I know you don't think the Rangers have a good defense, and they're not executing well right now. I think that's the term. But I think they've got some very good young talent on the blue line with D'Angelo and Fox. And I love Lindgren. I love the way he plays. And Hayek, I think they have some real talent back there. Trouba, to me, I think is very – I don't see a lot – I just – I don't know what they saw in Trouba to warrant that contract. He's okay. He's okay. But – to me, he's okay.
He hasn't been playing good possession hockey. And you set up the best defense possession hockey defensemen on the Rangers right now are Adam Fox and Anthony DeAngelo, hands down. Brady Shea's been decent, but after that, Smith and Trouba have been and obviously Mark Stahl has just been abysmal back there. Just negative possession defenseman.
Well, for Smith, to defend Smith a little bit, he really isn't he's only playing defense on the penalty kill. He's been playing fourth line wing for most of the year, and he's carved out a niche as a penalty killing defenseman, which you would not expect possession numbers to be that great when you're killing the power play, right? So he really hasn't played, as part of the six-man defensive unit this year. But yeah, I mean, it's you're right. I mean, I think this is part of the maturation process of the Ranger defensive core right now. They are not executing consistently, but I think there's talent back there. I think you'll see some incremental talent throughout the rest of the year, and I think it'll continue next year. I'm really very up on the Rangers' defensive talent. They just need a couple more rugged guys. If they can develop either by trade or through the system organically, a couple more rugged type of defensemen, I think they're going to be in pretty good shape on the blue line. And they definitely need that up front. I think they need a little bit more physicality up front. And hopefully if they do move Kreider, they can get some youngsters who play physically. Like Lemieux is starting to really come into his own right now, Rob. I think he's starting to find it. And if they can develop a guy like Tom Wilson, I think they're on their way,
Seeing Claude Lemieux at Ranger games, huh?
Yeah, right. Funny. That's I know. That's funny. But who would have thought, right? Who would have thought? But who would have thought Wayne Cashman would be an assistant coach for the Rangers back when Esposito was around as the GM? So a lot of strange. Or Brian Trottier coaching the Rangers, and we're going to get into that right now.
Or Fred Shearer.
Yeah, or Freddie Shearer. Right, exactly right. So it's a strange league, and you just never know where these guys are going to wind up. But why don't we get into our topic today? You and I have figured out maybe a topic to discuss is New York Rangers coaches from the 1960s to present day. Who are the better coaches? Who are the most overrated coaches, maybe, or underrated, or overrated, or impactful coaches? I think they all have the different categories. And why don't you start it off, Rob? What are your thoughts? First of all, what are your thoughts about David Quinn? Let's jump to present day. What are your thoughts about David Quinn right now as head coach of the Rangers, the second season?
I think we're on the same page with this. I'm excited about what David Quinn's building, and I hope they give him a lot of time. I hate seeing coaches, given 2 or 3 years and then that's it. I think this is a 5-year project with the Rangers, with all these kids and seeing the old guard go. I hope David Quinn's here for the entire process of building it up. I like what he's doing, especially building his own culture of a style of hockey. I think he's part of the new school, the John Cooper-esque style of coach. I think we agree on that, right? That we're happy with what Quinn has done so far. Absolutely.
I love his meritocracy approach. It doesn't matter if you're a veteran or a youngster. If you're not playing the right way, you're either going to be rotting the pine or you're going to be scratched for a game or two. And I think that's something that was missing, even with John Tortorella. I don't think Torts was one to, he would verbally challenge the veterans, but he never took action. He never went that next step, I don't think, in sitting guys. And I love the way Quinn is trying to bring that hard-nosed hockey to the Boston Bruins, Philadelphia Flyer, Washington Capitol, New York Islanders back in the day style of accountability. Playing physical, not playing dumb hockey, not playing, goon hockey, but just being as physical as you can be on all both ends of the ice. And he's like he says, it's a big man's game. It's a lot of big guys going at 1,000 miles an hour in a very small space. And if you're not hitting somebody, then you're not playing. You're not playing the right way. So, I think that's good. I think that's the culture. That's the mindset he's bringing to the club. and that meritocracy, that accountability. And yeah, I think he's done a great job with bringing this team along, like Ryan Strome, for example. And I hope it continues. I think you're right. And he's a college guy too, which surprised me when they first announced that he was their coach. I thought, all right, college hockey coach. College hockey's not known for their physicality, and but I was very, very surprised, very, very impressed with him so far the first 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, he's already got 100 games in his belt, which already has him in top 20 for Rangers coaches.
That's amazing. Well, I know.
Which I think one of the things that stands out about the Rangers, and when you look back at the last 30 to 40 years since Emile Francis had his long tenure, I mean, there's no standout coach for the New York Rangers. You look at other hockey teams, if anything, they're the most similar to the Devils. But you look at other organizations. Well, who would be the coach for the Rangers? That if you had like a Mount Rushmore of coaches, I if anything, the Rangers are known for getting guys that are more famous coaching elsewhere, whether it be or doing bigger things with other organizations like Craig Patrick or Roger Nielsen or John Muckler or Sather. To think that if you look at most games coached in the last 45 since Emile Francis, Alain Vigneault is next on the list.
Yeah, as far as longevity goes.
For longevity with the Rangers, which and the value of coaches. We don't need to get into that discussion, but has that made a difference in the Rangers' success since Mike Keenan left in 94?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the Rangers, the original 6 teams, the Rangers by far are the worst historically. Are the worst of the original 6 teams as far as one loss, number of Stanley Cup victories. Up until Emile Francis, or right through the time Emile Francis became their coach, they were a fairly stable organization. I mean, the Rangers have always had a very unique situation amongst the original 6, right? They went to a couple Stanley Cup finals the first 30, 40, 50 years of their existence, and they never played their games at home, right? A lot of their Stanley Cup final appearances were always on the road because the circus was in town, right? And that hurt them as far as winning Stanley Cups. They had a few 7-game Stanley Cup finals where they lost because most of their home games were played on the road. And, they lost a lot of players and coaches during World War II, which, other teams did as well. But the Rangers have always been a very unstable. Of the original 6, the Rangers have had the most unique set of circumstances amongst any of the original 6 teams. And coaches has been part of it. They've had many more coaches than the other 5. Original 6. And, Emile Francis really brought that stability to the club. And that's why I have Emile Francis as one of the best coaches in Rangers history, maybe the best, despite his failures in the playoffs. Because he brought a team that was the dregs of the National Hockey League. And he started drafting the right way, building his clubs the right way back in the early 1960s. And he established a structure and a cohesiveness to that organization, although he did have to come in twice to rescue the team during the season. He hired Bernie Boom Boom Geoffrion as a coach during the mid-60s. And even though Geoffrion had a winning record, he felt compelled, Emile Francis did, to come in and rescue the team and lead them the rest of the way. And then Larry Popine came in a few years later in the 73 season. Again, he had a winning record too, but obviously Francis either just can't stay away from coaching or he felt that the locker room wasn't the right way, and he came in. So he's had 3 separate stints as Rangers coach, obviously general manager, and took him to a Stanley Cup final in 1972. But he had some very disappointing losses in the playoffs. But then again, he never had the talent that the Boston Bruins had with Bobby Orr and Esposito and some of the other players. And so he was a mixed bag. But Emile Francis, I thought, was definitely one of the top coaches in Rangers history. He's one of the top. He would be a Mount Rushmore type of coach, if you will, Rob.
All right, so we agree with that. It's too bad, what he built there in the '70s, and it's a shame that when you see that that Ranger team got so close in the late '70s, and just to have it fall apart, get rebuilt again in the '90s, have it quickly fall apart again. So in the last 40 years, where do you go after Francis? Is
Right.
it
A great question.
I mean, is it Herb Brooks in the early '80s?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
Roger Nielsen in the early '90s? That too bad he couldn't stay to coach the team in '94, or maybe that's why there was a '94, is because Keenan worked his magic with that team, or is it really the last three coaches that provided quite longevity, from Rennie to Tortorella to Vigneault?
Yeah, great point. Just to finish up on Francis, another thing that conspired against Emile was the injuries. The Rangers always had horrific injuries that impacted, whether it be Brad Park's knee or Jean Rattel's ankle, Eddie Jockman's knee. They always had some very untimely injuries. But so after Francis, and in the same group as Francis, I think you'd mentioned Herb Brooks. I think I have best coach, overrated coach, and most underrated coaches. And under the best coaches, I've got Keenan, of course. I've got Quinn, and Quinn, I'm hoping with a question mark. And I've got Herb Brooks. Herb Brooks, I think, he was transformative. The Rangers had been to the Stanley Cup Finals a few years before with Freddie Shero, who I have as one of the most underrated coaches in Rangers history, even though he's only there for 2.5 years. But Herb Brooks came at a time where the team was basically bereft of. They just stripped the whole organization. He brought in, he had the Swedes, he had Nielsen and Hedberg. He brought in a lot of the Olympic players, and he really changed the way that not only did the way the Rangers played the game, but I thought he changed the way the National Hockey League played the game. Skating, skill, passing. He was very unconventional, and he upset the Flyers and a couple other teams in the Stanley Cup playoffs that they had no right to be on the same ice as those clubs. And he brought back a winning culture to the New York Rangers. And so I think Herb Brooks is he might even be the second best coach in Rangers history as far as the impact that he made on the club, because the team was really having a tough time once the Freddie Shero Stanley Cup final team came and went. I think Herb Brooks, I thought, was a very transformative, impactful coach. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I definitely agree with that. I'll take it one step further and say Fred Shero is the most underrated coach of the modern era. I think, we're not going to talk about where he was before he was in New York, but what he did there, his impact on hockey for the '70s and '80s, I don't think anybody matches that.
Totally.
Overall. And that's a shame that more people don't talk about Fred Shero as just this amazing coach. I agree with about Herb Brooks too, and it's a shame that he fits in better than any of the coaches in the title of this podcast, right? In terms of forgotten, and he'll obviously, for good reason, his career will always be defined by Lake Placid in 1980. But yeah, he had the Rangers playing with teams, you said it best, they had no business skating with, and winning series. He put together a remarkable record as head coach of the Rangers with teams that I think most people would struggle with naming, rattling off those rosters. No huge superstars, for his 4 seasons here.
Yeah. You had a couple carryovers from the Stanley Cup final team. You had Walt Kachuk, you had Ron Duguay. Who else? You had Tommy Lay. Well, Tom Laylaw wasn't on the Stanley Cup final team, but Kachuk and Duguay, and you had Hedberg and Nielsen, I think, were on the Stanley Cup final team, in '79. So they were older players then. Ron Greshner, but he was always hurt. Barry Beck came in from the trade. But you're right. They had the Olympians. You had Mark Pavlich, who was a great player for the New York Rangers, and so basically, and the goaltending was very suspect with Eddie Mio, and you had Glenn Hanlon, and so yeah, he really.
So, but you kind of. I'm saying, you kind of interrupt, but you kind of proved my point there. I mean, this isn't the team with
right.
Hall of Famers, perennial All-Stars,
Right.
50 goal scorers.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was successful with those teams.
Yeah, and he gave the Islanders all they can handle in a couple of,
Yeah.
even though they never went set to 7 games, but they gave the Islanders all they could handle, despite a lack of talent, without a doubt, Rob. And Keenan is also obviously up there. Obviously the 1 year he was there, they won the Stanley Cup, and he had a great career with the Philadelphia Flyers before that. You wish, obviously, that he would have stayed. But he was a guy that I think very similar to Quinn in that he was a meritocracy type of guy. I mean, he benched Brian Leetch several times during the year. Alexei Kovalev, he didn't care. And he traded Mike Gardner, a Hall of Fame right winger. He felt that the Rangers couldn't win a Stanley Cup with Mike Gardner. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I think they kind of robbed Peter to pay Paul when they won that Stanley Cup. They became a team that, I thought could have won maybe a couple of cups if Keenan had a little bit more patience. But maybe he felt they had to make those moves, And I wonder what would have happened if the Rangers didn't become a mercenary team, halfway through that season. If they would have won the cup, if they kept some of those kids that they traded, and if they could have lasted a little longer as far as being cup contenders. But you got to give the devil his due. It was 54 years. He came in, won a Stanley Cup, and rode off into the sunset. So obviously Mike Keenan goes down as, even though he's a 1-year wonder with them, he's obviously one of the best coaches in Rangers history. I wouldn't put him in Mount Rushmore, even though he did win a cup. But, I would say as far as the best coaches, I had Emile Francis, Herb Brooks, and Mike Keenan. And maybe, David Quinn is going to be one of those in the future. As far as underrated, I couldn't agree with him more. I put Fred Shero down only for his 2.5 years with the Rangers. I think he's a Mount Rushmore coach in the National Hockey League with what he accomplished with the Philadelphia Flyers. But Shero, he took a team that was floundering and early exits against the Islanders in 1975, and he brought them to the Stanley Cup final. He brought that Philadelphia Flyer discipline to the New York Rangers, and that was one of the more physical Rangers teams in the history of the New York Rangers. And look what he did. He went to the Stanley Cup Finals, and despite an injured John Davidson, and if Davidson didn't get hurt, who knows if they could have eked out a 7-game win against Montreal. But so I have Fred Shero down as one of the underrated, along with Roger Neilson and Tom Rennie. I think Tom Rennie was very underrated. If you look at his record, and the guys that succeeded him didn't fare much better than Rennie. Rennie's downfall was the playoffs, and that's why they got rid of him. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go finish off what you're saying.
No, I was just saying Rennie had the younger version of the teams that John Tortorella had, and he won just as much really as John Tortorella. I think I had Tortorella and Alain Vigneault as two of the most overrated coaches in Rangers history. Although they had success during the regular season, I thought they were both overrated coaches. But I had Roger Neilson, Freddie Shero, and Tom Rennie as my most underrated coaches. Neilson for the same reason as Rennie. He brought a winning attitude to that team. He brought a very disciplined style of, Captain Video, right? He brought video and structure to the Rangers as a head coach. And I think he could have won a cup or two if they just gave him kept him as coach before they hired Mike Keenan.
Yeah, those are good points. I want to go back to Tom Rennie. Tom Rennie really stabilized the franchise coming out of the lockout, coming after an era where you had just bouncing from coach to coach, right? Between Sather and Trottier and Ron Lowe and Muckler, and just no stability. 4 coaches that didn't take the Rangers to the playoffs. And he did that. He also was a player's first coach. I think he'd be great today if given another chance. Or at least 15 years ago, Tom Rennie coached today in the NHL. But it's interesting what you say about AV and Tortorella being overrated. If you go by points percentage, AV is the most successful coach in Rangers history after Francis. So is it that they didn't win with AV or Tortorella that keeps you from, or is it putting them higher, or is it that those teams were so stacked that they should have been winning games.
Yeah, I think with Vigneault, and I hate to put a finger on a player, but Vigneault did not. First of all, he did not sit. He did not have a meritocracy, right? He did not bench the veteran players. He never did. And he did not have a liking for young kids. So he was the antithesis of David Quinn or Mike Keenan. Alain Vigneault is one of the better coaches in the National Hockey League, probably in their history. But as a New York Rangers coach, he had more of a seasoned club than Tortorella and Rennie had. He had a lot of the same players as Rennie, and they did well during the regular season. He had a mature group. He didn't have superstars. The Rangers haven't had superstars until this club now is going to. You're going to see the development of hopefully a couple of superstars on this team. He had Henrik Lundqvist, and maybe Henrik Lundqvist, with his inconsistent play in the playoffs, changed the perception of Alain Vigneault as a big game coach. But he did lose some tough games with Vancouver against Boston. Some people felt that he should have benched Luongo and played the kid who played for the Devils, Schneider. Maybe Vancouver could have won a cup. I just didn't see Alain Vigneault as rising above what we had in Tortorella or what we had in Rennie. Torts is another one. I think Torts brought some discipline to the club, but he never really benched the veterans, and he had a very mediocre playoff run with the New York Rangers. He lost to a Devil team the Rangers really should have won, I thought, beaten. Yes. So I think Torts and Vigneault were good regular season coaches. I think they're two excellent NHL coaches, but just concerning their stint with the Rangers, I thought they were overrated. That's why I had Torts and Vigneault as two of the most overrated coaches for the New York Rangers. So what are your thoughts?
I spent a long time thinking about this, and we just had to talk about these coaches. Tortorella is so perplexing to me. He's loved by a lot of players, disliked by a lot of players, but I think he's more beloved. Talk about guys like Brian Boyle, who speaks so highly of him for being such a forthcoming coach. Not to bring up too many current events, but kind of the antithesis of a Mike Babcock. You knew where you stood with John Tortorella, and he was always honest, and he didn't play games. And then with AV, I don't know how he'll stand the test of time with Rangers fans.
I think AV obviously has done a great job with the Flyers, right? They are vastly improved. He's a good coach, without a doubt. He just didn't elevate that club to prominence, I don't think. And again, they played the LA Kings. I don't think they were as talented probably as LA. And again, I think Lundqvist may have impacted the legacy and the perception of both Torts and AV by not coming up, bigger in the big games in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And maybe that's not fair to them, but I just think that Tom Rennie set the table for both of those guys. Rennie probably got as much as he could out of that young group, but they didn't. Both Torts and Vigneault did not take it to the next level. They didn't develop that consistent Stanley Cup, championship caliber type of team. So. Interesting. You get asked 10 different people and you may get 10 different answers on stuff like this. But, I think we're pretty consistent. I think you and I both have great respect for Rennie, Shiro, and Nielsen as maybe underrated, who haven't gotten their just due over time. And I think we agree that, Francis, Quinn, and Brooks were probably the most impactful coaches because they came in at a time where maybe the team was floundering and they set the table for success over the long run or at least over a decent period of time. The very top coach, the very best coach that the Rangers have had, I think because it was such a critical point in the history of the club, I'm probably going to have to go with Emile, Francis, because they were still the original six back then. They were really floundering. The team went through the 1950s in a bad way, and he really changed the perception of the New York Rangers within the New York market. They became an extremely popular sports entity within New York, exciting team, established a powerhouse team, playing second fiddle to a lot of the top clubs in the National Hockey League, unfortunately. But if I had to put one coach up there as the very best, I would probably go with Emile Francis. Although it's not a slam dunk, I would say if I had to pick one guy, I would probably say Emile.
Yeah, I can't stand agreeing with you sometimes. I think you're right. I think we're on the same page on pretty much all of this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for this era, there's just some forgettable temes. Whether it be in the early 2000s or the late 80s. So some coaches that may have been good coaches. I can tell you my least favorite coach may have been Colin Campbell of all the coaches.
Really?
I've never been a big Colin Campbell fan, whether it be his time as a coach or especially his time as an executive with the NHL. I think discipline is a topic for another day.
Yeah, he had a tough act to follow, obviously succeeding Keenan, right? The year after they won the Stanley Cup. He didn't do badly. I mean, they had winning records with Colin Campbell. Very average in the playoffs.
Yeah, just an average. Yeah, they made the playoffs, multiple times in this 4 years. 4 years here. I think just it was a tough transition for the franchise going, because that I guess the 7 years or so after that were pretty rough.
Right. So just wrapping up, just real quick, guys that, you and I talked about before the show how attitudes on coaching have changed as far as how you treat people, right? How you treat players, how do you treat people in today's day and age. And, I think there's a couple of guys that, are old school, right? You had John Tortorella, you had Mike Keenan, maybe even Herb Brooks. I think Emile Francis, I don't remember ever hearing how Emile Francis verbally abused players. Tough coach, but he never had that reputation as being, matter of fact, some people thought that maybe he might have been too soft on some of the Ranger superstars back in the day. Maybe that could have propelled them to a couple of cups. But I think, you look at Mike Keenan, Iron Mike, then you had John Tortorella, and you had Herb Brooks, who was very tough, obviously, with both the Olympic team and the New York Rangers. He very strict, and, we don't know, how, truly how they interacted with the team. But, you wonder if how people have changed and the society has changed. Would Tom Rennie be one of the better coaches in the league today, like you said, or Roger Nielsen? Who knows, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about the culture of hockey, and hopefully we're now in a time that, at least from my perspective, I know there are a lot of people that disagree, but hopefully we're in a time where we see things change and we see that there's no need for abusive coaches and that kind of attitude.
Right, I agree.
And I think the Dan Quinn style is the way to go. I think he's going to mold this team and mold this youth, in the right direction.
Rob, I agree. I hope that we talk about David Quinn as one of the top coaches in Rangers history, and in the next couple of years, hopefully a Stanley Cup contender. So, well, anyway, Rob, it should be interesting how this whole season shakes out. We're only halfway there, and would love to see a very strong second half for the New York Rangers. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, who knows what hockey's going to look like when we talk next. with everything happening, I'm talking about news about current coaches and old coaches and how with these massive streaks, whether it be the Islanders win streak or the Canadiens 8 in a row losing and Minnesota playing great hockey. Everything just changes dramatically so quickly in this league.
It really does. I guess there is parity in the National Hockey League. But I would still expect to see the same top clubs, the Capitals, the Bruins, and the Blues. And now San Jose has come on strong, right? At least they had it up until the last week or so. So they had gotten off to an atrocious start, and they seem like they've righted the ship a little bit. So, yeah, I'm sure the next time we speak, sometime in in early January, we'll have a big update, and should be interesting how the complexion of the league has changed, if it has changed at that time.
Absolutely. And I'm not buying the Sharks. I'm just going to say it.
Okay.
We'll see what happens in a few weeks.
All right, Rob. Well, thanks, my man. And folks, thanks for tuning in. Again, if you have any suggestions for Rob and I as topics you want us to discuss, please let us know on our website. So for Rob Berger, this is Tom Browning saying thanks again for tuning in to the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. Thank you for listening. This has been a Go Tommy Boy production.